Old-fashioned murder and mayhem. Die with it in you. The Legend of Frankie Silver, 1831. It was a sweltering day in July 1833 as the curious crowd struggled to glimpse the pitiful figure partially hidden behind a crude makeshift wall. On the other side, the frail, thin form of a girl no more than 18 or 19 years old trembled. Her small hand fingered the delicate lace that trimmed the white dress given to her for this occasion by some of the more affluent ladies of Burke County, North Carolina. They had said the girl ought to have at least one pretty white dress in her life. Self-consciously, she reached up with bound wrists to the short crop of hair hanging in her eyes. She wished she had just let it be. She hated the idea of spending eternity with this ugly short hair. From out in the crowd she could hear shouts of people, her friends, neighbors, and even family, encouraging her to unburden her soul. Now's the time to confess all. But intermingled in the shouting she heard the quiet counsel of her father. It won't make any difference now. Die with it in you, Frankie. Resigned, she silently lowered her chin as the scaffold floor fell away. Welcome to another episode of Old-Fashioned Murder and Mayhem. I am your host, Mindy Hudson, bringing you tales of scandal and murder with a twist of genealogy. It has been my usual aim to research and present stories that are not well covered by other true crime channels. However, I was asked by a subscriber to look into a legendary crime that happened in the mountains of Appalachia nearly 200 years ago, which is still talked about to this day. It didn't take long for me to get caught up in the legend. Despite a plethora of stories, poems, ballads, podcasts, and theories available, I found just enough extra information that I decided to share my own impression of what may have happened that December night in 1831. Before we begin, I believe it is important to remember that we should never try to judge the actions and attitudes of our ancestors through the lens of our modern beliefs and experiences. The lives and customs of our ancestors were vastly different. What a modern listener may find repulsive or immoral may have been natural and normal in any given period of historical time. Listener discretion is advised. With this caveat in mind, join me now as we explore the true crime story of Die With It In You, the Legend of Frankie Silver, 1831. This dreadful, dark, and dismal day has swept my glories all away. My sun goes down, my days are past, and I must leave this world at last. In the late 18th century, the rugged mountains of Appalachia were home to former European settlers who had fled their homelands of Germany, Scotland, and Ireland, seeking religious and political freedom. Following the Revolutionary War, these hardy, fierce individuals served as a buffer between the civilized English towns of the East Coast and the unruly native population of North America who were being pushed ever westward. Not easily tamed themselves, the mountain folk had their unique code of ethics, customs, superstitions, and entertainment. The family of Reverend Jacob Silver could trace their heritage back to their German Jewish forefathers, whose original name, Silberstein, evolved into an Americanized Silver. Arriving first in Maryland, the family settled in Frederick County for a time before traveling southwest to the Carolinas. Jacob Silver, born in 1791, married Elizabeth Wilson in 1814 in Buncombe County, North Carolina. They had one son, Charles, born 1812. Elizabeth died shortly thereafter, and Jacob married Nancy Reed, with whom he went on to have many sons and daughters. Reverend Jacob, Jake, Silver built a comfortable 2-story log home tucked into the rolling Appalachian mountainside in what was Burke County, North Carolina, in the early 19th century. It should be noted that although the county lines have moved throughout the decades, it was Burke, then Yancey, and now Mitchell counties. The house is still standing to this day and has remained in the Silver family throughout the generations. Around 1820, the family of Isaiah Stewart moved into land adjoining the Silver property. The Silver family came from Anson County, North Carolina. Isaiah Stewart was born in 1776 and married Barbara Barbary Howell about 1803. They had at least 4 sons and 1 daughter, John, Jackson, Joseph, Francis, and Blackstone. From the bits of evidence that can be gleaned from legend, documents, and logic, it is apparent that Frances, called Frankie, was a strong-willed and hot-tempered young girl. She was described as petite with fair hair. It was later recalled she was also industrious. According to one account, she could card and spin 3 yards cotton a day on a big wheel. It didn't take long for her to catch the eye of young Charley Silver, 17, eldest son of Reverend Jake Silver. The two began a romance and soon decided they wanted to marry. Frankie was only about 15, and with the approval of family and friends, they married on October 15, 1829. The couple immediately went to live with Charley's bachelor uncle, Green Silver, in Buncombe County, who offered to put his young nephew to work. Uncle Green had crushed his hand moving lumber and needed help with manual labor around his farm. Aside from whatever chores Uncle Green had him to do, Charley, tall and muscular, loved to hunt and fish. These activities left the new bride alone and bored more often than a teenage girl could abide. Immaturity, coupled with unrealistic expectations about what married life should be like, led to a volatile relationship between the two. Despite their bouts of fighting, parting, and making up, Charley and Frankie were soon expecting a child. On November 3, 1830, Frankie gave birth to a daughter named Nancy Matilda. At this point, the little family had moved into an outlying building on Jake Silver's property. The cabin sat upon a mountainous pathway behind the Baptist church where the Silver family worshipped in Kona. From its perch on the mountainside, one could just spot the old Silver homestead below in the distance. Frankie's parents also lived about a mile away on the other side of the Tow River. Life went along as usual until the end of December the following year. Little Nancy had just turned a year old, and the weather in the mountains had grown miserable and cold. It was coming upon Christmas when Charley usually went hunting to trap furs. Thursday, December 22nd, 1831, Charley began gathering his gear. As it wasn't unusual for him to be gone for several days when hunting, Frankie insisted that he chop enough wood to keep the cabin warm for her and the baby for the entire time he expected to be gone. So he did. After chopping and splitting a cord of wood, he came into the cabin to rest before preparing to go on his hunt. The following afternoon, Frankie made her way down the mountain slope with Nancy on her hip toward the Silver home place. Once inside, she asked whether anyone had seen her husband, as he had not returned home. Reverend Jake Silver remarked that Charley had passed by on his way home the previous day, but hadn't been seen since that time. No great alarm was felt by the family, however, as it was common for him to go off for days at a time. Nevertheless, when Christmas Day came and went with no sign of Charley, the Silver family did become concerned. In the meantime, Frankie had taken the baby and went to stay at a friend's house so as not to be alone. That Monday, after Christmas passed, Reverend Jake gathered a group of men to go out looking for Charley. They scoured all the usual places the young man hunted, but found no trace of him. An uneasiness began to fall over the community. It was clear Charley must be dead, but where was the body? Had he slipped through the ice into the river? Running out of options, Charley's father resorted to seeking help from the superstitious old ways. He went to see an old conjurer who practiced divination. The old fellow marked out the 4 points of the compass and took a type of ball tied to a string, which he held over the map like a pendulum. Curiously, the ball didn't swing. The man asked if it was possible that Charley could still be in the cabin. Reverend Jake didn't think it was possible for a little thing like Frankie to kill Charley and move his body by herself. The question was asked, what about her people? At about the same time, some of the men had already decided to go back to the cabin and do a thorough search. When they stirred the ashes from the fireplace, they noted pieces of bones and that the ashes appeared to be greasy. They took a small stone from the ashes and put it in water to boil and see if bubbles would rise. They did, and in great abundance, indicating a high amount of fat in the ash. More ashes and bone were found stuffed in a hole located near the spring, along with a heel iron from hunting moccasins like the ones Charley wore. With this evidence, the puncheon floorboards near the fireplace were pulled up, and a large puddle of blood was found beneath them. Eventually, part of a burned torso and a skull were found hidden in various places in the vicinity. It became clear that the body had been dismembered and burned. The shock wave that rippled through the community set in motion the beginning of what would become a local legend. Charley had been murdered, but by whom? On January 9, 1832, an arrest warrant was issued by Elijah Green for Frankie Silver, her mother Barbary Stewart, and youngest brother Blackstone Stewart. According to the warrant, it was believed that Frankie struck Charley twice with an axe, the second blow being fatal. Her mother and brother were accused of aiding in the disposal of the body. However, after the initial examination, only Frankie was held for murder. Her mother and brother were released due to lack of evidence of their involvement. Frankie Silver pleaded not guilty to the crime, and a trial was set for Thursday, March 29, 1832, at Morganton, Burke County. There was no physical evidence linking Frankie to the murder of Charles Silver. The case was tried on circumstantial evidence. Because defendants, particularly women, were not allowed to testify on their behalf at that time, Frankie never made a public statement about the case, except to claim she was not guilty. The strategy of her counsel was to make the state prove her guilt. Nonetheless, it was a small town, and the sensationalism of the affair had imaginations working overtime and tongues wagging. What happened, and why? Some believed that Frankie was a jealous wife who falsely accused poor Charley of infidelity and nagged him relentlessly. Others believed that Charley had regretted his decision to marry and was prone to going out and drinking hard liquor, called Mountain Dew, while carousing with morally bereft girls, leaving his bride stewing at home saddled with a baby. It was rumored that he was lazy and often beat Frankie when she confronted him about his neglect. The truth probably lay somewhere in between. And the truth was hard to discern. Frankie refused to tell. It seemed most likely Charley was struck and killed at home, but could a petite girl like Frankie, who was about 17 years old at the time, overpower a big, strapping man like Charley? And was it possible she could dismember him and burn his body alone? Could she have distributed the unburned carcass in various places on the mountain in one night? And although it was legally permissible for a man to whip his wife if she, quote unquote, needed correction in those days, If she had testified that she had struck him while defending herself, she would most likely have been charged with manslaughter, not murder, and been saved from the gallows. Whatever the truth, the verdict of the jury was returned on March 30th, 1832, guilty. Her counsel immediately moved for a new trial, but the state recommended she be remanded back to jail until the July court, at which time she should be taken to the place of public execution and hanged until dead. At this, Frankie asked the judge to allow her case to be taken to the Supreme Court. The motion was allowed. Even so, her sentence was upheld at the Supreme Court, and her father, Isaiah Stewart, and brother Jackson Stewart, who had posted bond for the appeal, had to pay court costs. In September 1832, Judge Swain was supposed to hear the final appeal for Frankie's case, but he failed to show up to court, which granted her another 6-month stay. Her case was brought before the court in March 1833, where it was ordered that she be returned once again to the jail where she had spent the past 14 months to await her execution, which was to be held June 28, 1833. Time was truly running out for young Frankie. In the interim, public sympathy grew for the young woman. The horror and passion of the crime had faded over time, and people began to realize that in a very short time a young woman, a young mother, was about to swing from the gallows. Some of the well-to-do ladies of Burke County and the surrounding area started putting together petitions to beg for the life of Frankie Silver. Even many of the jurors who had passed sentence on her signed it. In a desperate attempt to save his daughter, Isaiah Stewart and his brother managed to break into the basement of the jailhouse and spirit Frankie away late on the night of May 13, 1833. She cut her pretty blonde hair short and donned trousers and a shirt. Hiding under a pile of hay in the cart, she was whisked away in the night. As soon as the escape was discovered, the sheriff published the following notice in the papers and set out to search for her. Quote, $50 reward, broke jail. The subscriber offers a reward of $50 for the apprehension and delivery to him in Morgantown, North Carolina, of a woman named Frances Silvers, who has lately been convicted of murdering and burning her husband, and sentenced to be executed on the 28th of June next. She made her escape on Monday night, the 13th instant, by the assistance of some person or persons who entered the jail by one of the basement story windows and opened the doors leading to the prisoner's apartment by the aid of false keys. The said Frances Silvers is about 20 years of age, rather below the ordinary stature, spare-made, speaks quick and distinct, has a clear and rather shrill voice, light complexion, round, fair face, small, black, piercing eyes, and a good and regular set of teeth, as well as recollected. The subscriber has good reason to believe that she will cut off her hair and disguise herself in man's apparel in order to make her escape. John McGuire, jailer, Morgantown, North Carolina. End of article. It didn't take long for the sheriff to catch up with them. After riding under the hay for a time, Frankie had crawled out and was walking beside the wagon, her uncle leading the horse along a mountain road near Sandy Run in southeastern Burke County. When the lawman approached, she didn't have time to hide, calling out, "Where are you going, Frankie?" In her lowest voice, she dipped her head and answered, "I thank you, sir, but my name is Tommy." Her uncle, in his terror, chimed in, "Yes, sir, her name is Tommy." It was too late. Frankie's last hope of freedom was gone. She was taken back to jail, where she resigned herself to her fate. On May 28, 1833, Frankie finally gave an account of her side of the story. The confession was a transcription of her oral testimony, as Frankie couldn't read or write. In fact, she signed the confession with an X. The only known copy of the full confession found is a reprint in the Southern Citizen, Asheboro, North Carolina, on February 25, 1837, 4 years later. It tells the tragic tale as follows, quote, I, Francis Silvers, a native of the state of North Carolina and raised in the county of Anson, more recently a citizen of Burke, actuated by the feelings of deepest solemnity and for purposes purely beneficial to the world as well as myself, do in these presence and in the presence of that God before whom it is the sentence of the laws of our country, I shall appear on the 28th June, and deeming it a necessary preparatory expedient to my appearing as a suppliant before God, to implore from him that mercy that in the fullness of his grace he is able to extend to all such sinful, miserable creatures as myself, make a full and complete confession of my life, from and after my being married to Charles Silvers, down to the 22nd day of December A.D. 1831, and embracing 2 years, 2 months, and 7 days. Mr. Jacob Silvers and my father Isaiah Stewart, being near neighbors, it so happened by the dispensation of Providence that his son Charles Silvers and myself became attached to each other, and he finally proposed marriage, to which, and without reflection, I gave my consent, believing that we could spend our days in love and mutual assistance to each other. We were married accordingly on the 15th of October in the year 1829, and it was contrary to the approbation of both our friends. Not long after we were married, say 3 months, while living at Green Silvers, Buncombe County, on a certain day of the week, he went out with his gun and dogs hunting. In the evening, when he came home, I told him he had better be at work hauling the smokehouse logs instead of idling time away, that his Uncle Green Silvers had spoke to me about my husband being sporting and hunting and living on him, and he a cripple at the time by the mash of his thumb received by lifting logs. His reply to me was, "Damn you, if you take his part instead of mine, I will put you to an end," holding a rope in his hand at the time. I made a reply to him like the following: I wished to take no one's part in this, but wished he would do and attend to what was right, and he then declined. During the last of the same week, we were sent for to visit Mr. Woody's family, about a half a mile from Green Silvers, and we both concluded to go. But shortly after we started, he, for reasons unknown to me, ordered me to go back, and further stated that if I did not, he would sacrifice me in the road. I asked him what were his reasons. He told me, "Because I don't want you to go with me," and gave me a push and made off in a run. In the morning, I asked him when he returned what was the reason he treated me so. I told him I had left my father and taken him for my friend. He told me he was not my friend, neither did he intend to be, but wished I'd go back to my father or my friends and remain. Repeated evidences were made by him of dissatisfaction by him the same morning, and as many by me to know the cause, by all without success. He left the house and swore he would not return until I left it. I then left the house and went to his uncle, Ned Wilson's. In the evening he came after me and said he was advised by his uncle to make peace, and we agreed. Sometime in the next week we moved over onto Toe River in the county of Burke, on the place where Thomas Silvers formerly lived, at which place we lived friendly 2 or 3 months. But on the evening of a certain day, when, as he said, he had just come from his father's, he told me he had been persuaded to leave me, and he intended to do it. He continued to talk in that way until we went to the house when he commenced whipping the teeth of the card that I had in my lap. I then told him he acted as if he had not good wit. He replied to me, "Damn you, I thought I could make you mad after a while." After which very rough and ill language passed from each to each one, and it resulted in an affray. He pushed me out of the door, struck me one or two blows, and drew off of me one side of my frock. Things remained this way until evening, when I returned from his father's, where through the course of the day he had sent me. I found all his clothes and himself missing, hunted for some time, and was convinced he had left me. I then began to cry, and he heard me and come up to the house and told me, "Damn you, I had no intention to leave you, but I done it to try your pluck, to see if you loved me, and by that have found out that you do." Then, for some time, we lived in peace, but finally we began to dispute, and several little disputes took place, and at different times. Though a certain evening when he came home to supper, he asked me if there was no clobber but that, which I had set for him in a cup, that he wanted some for his brother. I then replied no. He then said he would not eat it, for he would as soon believe I had an intention to poison him as any way. And then I threw out what was in the cup myself, after which warm language passed from each to each other, and resulted in an unfortunate affray. He struck me one or two licks and pushed me out of the door and told me to leave the place. I should not live there, neither should I go to any of my friends to stay, nor have any of my clothes or property, bonnet or shoes. I then flew into a passion and swore I would be damned if I did not have them, if I had to sell my cow to buy a gun to kill him with, or burn the house over him. A contention was kept up between us until we parted. I then went to my father's, and he, as I always have and will believe, went to his miss. I remained at my father's something like 2 weeks, at which time he sent a man in the neighborhood for me, and sent me word he was in distress, was sorry for what was done, and wished to see me. I went to see him, for I was willing to believe, even at that time, that I loved him. He laughed when he saw me, and we agreed and went together to my father's. Then on the next day we moved into an old outhouse on the plantation on which my father lived. We there remained not more than a month, when I went down to milk my mother's cow and returned, but did not return as soon as he did from my father's, where we both were, in consequence of which he flew into a passion, and about bedtime he took his knife in bed with him with the intention to kill me. I, being afraid, remained out of bed until he went to sleep, and took it from under his pillow. He threatened to kill me, though, before he lay down. We then remained in peace, or what to us in them times peace, for some weeks, but finally he obstinately left me. It was obstinately done because he would never give me any cause for his doing so, and remained out for near 3 weeks among his misses, as I have just cause to believe, until his frolic was out, when he come, though during his absence I had left home and moved the things to my father's, to one of the neighbors' houses, where he expected to see me pass. He met me and said he was sorry he had treated me unfriendly. He wished to treat me friendly, and wanted me to move back so that we could live again together. At this time I was far advanced in pregnancy. I loved him, and told him I was willing to move back again. I loved him, but it must be on conditions he would not again abuse me. We went together, first at my father's, and then back at his father's, where I was confined. No occurrence took place of any importance previous to my being confined, except on a certain occasion when at his father's, and in the presence of his sister, mother, and aunt, I threw myself on the bed where he was lying, and perhaps I may have threw myself partly on him. He arose immediately and struck me one blow on my head with his fist, for which he was strongly reproved by someone present. He said nothing until I went out, when he followed me out and said he was sorry for it. I went out and sat down without saying anything until he came out to me. Just previous to my being confined, and when it seemed to be my greatest pleasure to see him, we disputed the propriety of my being at my father's with my mother. He got mad, and in the presence of his sister broke a switch with which to whip me. I then was overcome, and fell into his arms and cried to him not to injure me. Never yet had I ever made the first attempt to fend off any of his blows, or to make an attack on him, for as God is the only judge before whom I may now be brought to appear on this earth, I say, as if I already at his bar, I then loved him, and had not as yet the most distant intention to do him any injury. Various times we differed, and as often did he threaten me with death. And his determination not to make use of any means by which to support his children by me, nor any other woman, I am convinced that notwithstanding at very many times I failed to submit to him as a woman should do. But without grace or religion this is not uncommon, nor yet do I by any means pretend to justify him in any acts towards me that were connected with brutality, as many of his acts were. Yet I always thought that I loved him more than he loved me. Very many times has his treatment toward me been reprehensible and insufferable, such, for instance, as the following. On returning from a preaching on a certain occasion, he was mad and threatened me with death. He took down his gun and snapped it at me twice without being replied to in any way. At another time, when asked to make a fire, he refused. I told him it was infernal laziness. He struck me one blow that fractured my rib when my child was only about 3 months old. After receiving such abuse, I was afraid to live with him, and we parted. Some time after, he come to my father's and snatched up the child. I then made application to his father, and he told me to take it. He told me, perhaps he may recollect this when I am dead and gone, that if Charles ever did so again, to make a similar application to him, and he would make application to the court, and inform the court that he, Charles, was not fit to keep a child. And on another occasion, too, when we had scarcely anything upon which to subsist, my father gave me a cow, and I took her home. His father offered me another, and I wanted to have them both, as was the opinion of his father. But upon taking the first home, I received such abuse as caused me to come to this prison with scars, and was then threatened with death if I ever told it. I am still willing to say that in the midst of all my abuse and distress, I had not harbored any intention to injure him, but was told, and I think there are witnesses to it, that he intended to kill me by inches to keep from being hung. On Wednesday, I told him I had 4 days' work to do. 1 day break flax, 1 day wash, Friday for myself, and Saturday go to the quilting, to which he was willing. Wednesday we both worked in cleaning flax. He broke and I scutched. When we were done, we went to the house, and I had not scutched mine as well as it might have been done. His father told him it was done very well for the first time I had done, but he had better take it back and give it a few more licks, as he had to wear it. He replied to his father that he did not intend ever to wear it. Thursday, the 22nd, I went to wash at my mother's, and he went to his father's. I returned home from my mother's in the evening with a large skillet on my head and my child in my arms. He came in after I had been there some time, and asked me in a very rough manner why I had not made a fire. I then asked him why he had not cleaned the chips out of the house left from making a little wagon for his brother. He replied, "Damn you, I left that for you to do. I have you to wait on me, make fires and everything else." He then told me he had just come from his father's and had fed the cow. Just after dark, when we had seated ourselves around the fire, he said to me, "Poor Cass, I reckon she knows her doom by this time. I reckon she's now in hell." I then asked what better would become of him if he was to die in the fix he was in. He replied he would as soon be in hell as any other place. He then said, "Frankie, do you want to do any better?" I told him I could not help, while I was aggravated, to commit so much sin. He then jumped and struck me with his fist, and then pitched at the axe that lay on the floor and drew it on me as if he intended to strike me, swearing at the same time that one or the other must die before day. Then laid down the axe and pitched at the gun, and then said, "Damn you, I will shoot you," and carelessly threw the shot pouch over his shoulders, and then poured the powder into the gun. And then, while hunting a bullet in the shot pouch, I discovered his eyes were off of me, and I immediately pitched at the axe, got hold of it, and struck him one blow with the pole of the axe, and he fell. And as he struck the floor, I struck him one more blow, which was all I struck him. I then threw down the axe and for a few moments was insensible to everything, after which I discovered him struggling and blood running. I could hear him breathe long sighs and gasp. I do not know how long I lay in bed. I think an hour or more. I then thought I must get him out of the way somehow, or be hung, and studied some what to do, knowing that no one saw it. Nothing I could say would do me any good. I thought of the ground being frozen, so that I could not put him in the ground. I thought if I could only call back the lick, I would give 10,000 worlds. At the time I wished I'd been dead too, but knowing I must do something with him, I just rolled him into the fire, whole as he was, without touching him with any edged tool, and did not cut him in any way at all. The fire was small, with a good deal of ashes on the hearth. I picked up near 20 or more boards, with which I think was several big bushels of hickory chips that lay all around the house where he had cut wood. I pulled nothing off of him at all. His hat was not on, but I threw it in and burned it up. He burnt the whole night, and burnt entirely up, with the exception of a few specks, which were found by others afterwards. But I took no part of it out, only some small pieces of bones. I washed all the blood off of the floor in the night. I then, soon as day came up, washed my things as I before was to do. When I got done washing, about 9 or 10 o'clock, I went down to Jake's, his father's, and there tried to cut a coat for my child out of one of my calico frocks, but was so alarmed I could not do it, for fear they would see the trembling of my hand. I stayed at Jake's all night. Saturday morning he sent John before day up to my house for Charley's gun, and when the boy returned, I saw Jake load the gun, and the sight of that gun gave me more pain and distraction than anything I had experienced, as it put me in mind of Charles and our unhappy affray. That day, Saturday, I went to Ned Wilson's to the quilting in Buncombe County. The next day was Sunday and Christmas Day. I went that day at James Howell's. The above statements concerning my confession in the above-named case I do hereby solemnly declare in the presence of my God, at whose bar I expect to appear the last Friday in June next, then and there to give an impartial account of my conduct during my past life, is the honest truth, as near as I can possibly recollect. May his divine goodness and tender mercies be extended toward me and save me from death eternal. Given under my hand in the jail at Morganton in Burke County, North Carolina, in the presence of W.C. Bevins and Thomas Wilson, Deputy Sheriff, this the 23rd day of May, A.D. 1833. Her mark, X. Francis Silvers. End of article. The sensational case of the murder of Charles Silver was nearing its end. Nevertheless, there were still so many unanswered questions. The details of the crime eventually were woven into fantastic folk tales, ballads, and books. Generations of North Carolina children have feared the ghost of the crazy axe-wielding bride who chopped up her husband and burned up his body. Musicians strummed the sad tale of the young lass whose jealousy cost her everything. In 1886, a poem called The Ballad of Frankie Silver was published in North Carolina's the Lenoir Topic, which was purported to be a confession sung by Frankie from the gallows. It turned out to be an old ballad whose original lyrics were rewritten by a man named Thomas W. Scott to fit the details of Frankie's published confession of 1833. A transcription of the ballad can be found in the description box. It was said that Frankie's father, fearing his daughter's body would be desecrated after burial, had at least 3 graves dug to confuse would-be grave robbers. However, her body never made it to any of those graves, as the July heat made it necessary to bury her behind a tavern along the way. Charles Silver's body also lies in multiple graves due to the discovery of his remains occurring over an extended time. The family chose not to dig up the original grave, but buried those pieces side by side in the church graveyard. It was never known for certain if Frankie had help in disposing of Charles's body. The baby, Nancy, went to live with her Stewart grandparents, but the family seemed to fall under a curse following Frankie's death. In the years that followed, Isaiah Stewart was killed when a chestnut tree crushed him. Jackson Stewart was killed by Union sympathizers. It was believed Joseph fell from a wagon and was killed. Blackstone Stewart was hung for stealing horses in Kentucky, and Barbary Stewart was bitten by a poisonous snake and died. Nancy Silver, the daughter of Charles and Frankie, married David Parker in 1850, with whom she had 6 children. David was killed during the Civil War in the First Battle of Manassas. She married William Neal Robinson in 1872 and had 2 more children. Nancy died in 1901 in Macon County, North Carolina. Her descendants have multiplied and spread throughout the country. The sad yet chilling tale of Charley and Frankie Silver has captured the imaginations of the mountain folk for nearly 200 years. Frankie Silver, executed on Friday, July 12, 1833, 2 weeks after the appointed date, wore a pretty white dress given to her by the ladies of Burke County, who had tried so valiantly to save her, according to historian Dr. Thomas Clore. When asked if she had any final words, Frankie opened her mouth to speak, but legend says her father called out for her to, quote, "Die with it in you, Frankie," end quote. Well, I guess she did. Thank you for listening to Die With It In You, The Legend of Frankie Silver. Special thanks to subscriber Brandy Morrison for suggesting this story. While researching the various articles, documents, folk tales, and songs that tell this fascinating story, I ran across one song in particular, written and performed by Jodi Hildebran and Jordan Crosby Lee, called Couldn't Be Happiers, which captured the essence of Frankie's story. The song is entitled Frankie Silver, Take It to the Grave, used here by the gracious permission of the authors and copyright holders.
It's July in Burke County, it must be 90 degrees. The floorboards of the gallows creak beneath her feet. Frankie squints into the crowd, she can make out every face. They remind her of the folks who gathered on her wedding day. Standing in her best dress and Charley dressed in black, the priest asked them, how long will this love last? Will you take it to the grave? Take it to the grave. In sickness, health, and when hard times come your way, take it to the grave. So they tell the town that he ran off, left Frankie all alone. But that ashen bone in her heart has a different story to tell. The blood under the floorboards sent Frankie off to jail. The trial was slipped, the judge all dressed in black. A jury of his peers said she'd hang for her evil act. Now go, take it to the grave, take it to the grave. She's a guilty soul and there's no one else to blame. Take it to the grave, take it to the grave. She's a guilty soul and there's no one else to blame. Take it to the grave. Well, that hangman's noose is tied around her throat. Speak, now's the time to unbutton your soul. As she starts to speak, a voice screams, won't change anything. Take it to the grave. 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 Well, close your eyes now, girl, and be brave. And take it to the grave. Take it to the grave. It's July in Burke County. She can't escape the heat. The floorboards of the gallows give way beneath her feet.
Information about resources used in piecing this story together may be found in the description box along with permissions. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share, and join us again next month for another episode of Old-Fashioned Murder and Mayhem.